Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Johanna, and I lead the UN Innovation Network, and it's a collaborative community of innovators from all across the UN and beyond. And today I have the pleasure to host this event on scaling innovation for and together with our friends at UN Global Pulse. Before we start, I want to make sure that we're all in the right mindset, and I'd like to ask you to take a step back and maybe think about what scaling innovations means to you. We all know that it's important. We know that we should be doing it, but what does it actually mean? Does it mean reaching 1 million people? Does it mean scaling to 20 country offices? Does it mean changing the way the organization works? We're curious to hear what scaling innovations means to you. Please put it in the chat. Very curious to hear your thoughts. Innovating, trying new things, and then scaling the things that work is important to the work of the UN. And innovation has long been a priority for the Secretary General. He's frequently highlighted the need to move beyond individual pilots and little experiments towards investing in approaches that don't just have the potential to scale, but that actually do transform the way the UN works and serves its beneficiaries, so that do actually scale. And in fact, the Secretary General has recently identified a set of key capabilities to help the UN transform into a UN 2.0 that is ready to respond to the challenges of these complicated times that we live in. And these capabilities, this so-called quintet of change, are data, digital, strategic foresight, behavioral science, and of course, innovation, a key element thereof. And the SG believes that all UN colleagues need to embrace and adopt these capabilities to transform the work of the UN. And of course, we're hoping not just to embrace and adopt them, but we're hoping to also scale these approaches to unlock their full potential for impact. Scaling innovation is important and holds tremendous potential for impact, we know that, but we also know that all things that are worth doing, they are not necessarily easy. There are many challenges unique to scaling, and there are many bottlenecks in the UN that innovators face when they're trying to scale innovations. To give us a bit of an overview of what the key challenges to scaling are and how we can overcome them, I'd like to introduce you to John Besant. He's the Emeritus Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Exeter in the UK. He's also the Senior Advisor on Innovation Scaling at UN Global Pulse and one of the lead authors of this new report, which we're launching today, Scaling the Summit. John, you and the team, you've done some really tremendous research, very extensive all across the UN and beyond. Can you share your key findings with us, please?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Johanna, and thank you, Kirsten, for framing the challenge so effectively. Let me just briefly share my screen. This is where the technology starts to be fun. There we go. And hopefully now you can all see that. Yep. So what I really want to do is very briefly just give you an overview of the work we've been doing around this big challenge of scaling innovation. Just to remind of the challenge, innovation matters. Of course, we've just heard from Kirsten how central that's becoming to the whole rethinking around UN 2.0. But innovation as a slogan isn't going to get us anywhere. We need to understand and work with innovation as a set of concepts. And one of the first things we have to remember is it's not just like the cartoons, bing, light bulb flashes. That's ideas. We really need ideas, but on their own, they're not enough. We've got to create solutions that add value from those ideas. But even that isn't enough. Even though we've done a lot of very good work with boot camps and other ways of helping people bring their ideas towards solutions which can be piloted and which are effective, that's still not enough. Because if we really want impact from innovation, if we, to take the words from Kirsten, if we are interested in changing the world, we need scalable solutions. And the trouble is that what we know about scale is it's hard, and many attempts to scale fail. And that was really what was behind our research. We looked across various sources, a lot of literature inside and outside the UN, and we spoke to a lot of people inside and outside the UN, trying to get a handle on what are the challenges in scale and what can we do about it. And there's some good news. I think the most important piece of good news, we do know quite a lot about this scaling challenge now. We haven't got GPS precision necessarily, but we certainly have a map, and that helps us focus on where the challenges are and what we might do to support them. But perhaps it is worth reminding ourselves, we're talking about a journey into uncertainty. Innovation's all about uncertainty. And this one is really not just a short-term afternoon hike. It's a long-term expedition. Now, I put the picture of Mount Everest there very deliberately. When I was a child, a very long time ago, but when I was a child, my parents used to go and visit family, and they'd be sitting in the main room with the adults talking, and I'd be left with a book, which I found fascinating. I used to love visiting my uncle to read this book, which was all about the Everest expedition. But what reminded me there, well, what that reminded me of today was very much, this was not a simple thing. This was carefully planned. It involved many different people over an extended period of time, tackling something that was pretty difficult. So that's, if you like, a metaphor for this challenge of scale. And in particular, as I've said, one of the things that we've learned a lot about, which can help focus our attention, and we'll hear more about it from others later today, but we do know a lot about the pain points, the blocks, the dangerous places along the way. So, as I said, the main challenge we face is how can we support innovation teams with their good ideas, their good solutions? How do we support them moving to scale? And there are a number of key interventions which come out regularly when we look at this. The first of these is around having a strategy, helping those teams articulate and clarify, develop a strategy. If we're talking about an expedition over time, then we're going to need a strategy for that. And we're going to need a solution which has been hammered into shape such that it's robust enough to be scaled. We also need to think again about the innovation team, because what we know is that the team that perhaps started, the originators with all the passion and vision, may not always be the right ones to carry things further forward. At the very least, we're going to need additional members of the team. We're going to need to grow the organization in order to help it deal with the challenges on that journey to scale. So helping those teams with their organizational development, another key area where we could intervene. The third, of course, is resources, particularly funding. But here we're not talking about simply throwing money at the problem, but rather staging that funding to help with the steps on the journey, but at the same time making that funding available in flexible form, because we are talking about a journey under uncertain conditions into a world that's still rather foggy. And this is a challenge for many funders, and they acknowledged in interviews, because of course many of our funding models are rather traditionally based on clear projects rather than the uncertain world of an innovation expedition towards scale. The fourth area of intervention, there's a lot of specialized knowledge needed as we make the journey. Questions around intellectual property or marketing and so on. So again, ways in which we can intervene, provide access to those specialized knowledge inputs. The fifth area is particularly important. Teams need help, and particularly they need mentoring, help and guidance as they make their journey. And what I'm not really talking about here is a sort of pat on the head, reassuring kind of coaching. Yes, keep going, you're nearly there. That's not very helpful. What's really valuable in this context is having critical friends, people with insight, prepared to challenge, to help shape, and to support teams over an extended period of time, not just at the kickoff, but throughout their extended journey to scale. Another area which is quite significant is giving those teams the space within which to operate, whether that's time away from what they're doing as a mainstream task, whether it's permission to explore and experiment, to work in the uncertain world, whether it's a different physical environment, whether it's a place where they're able to collide with different ideas and people, essentially creating a space within which innovation can happen is another important intervention. And the last key one to mention here is that what we're not talking about here is a solo act. Scaling innovation is a multiplayer game. It needs many different people to help it to happen. And in the innovation theory world, we talk about complementary assets. Let me give you a very simple example. Jeff Bezos and Amazon did not invent remote retailing. That actually dates back about 100 years to people like Sears and Roebuck and the other pioneers of the mail order catalog, reaching remote and rural populations with all sorts of retail offerings. That's a great idea, but to make that happen, and importantly, to make it work at scale, requires a lot of people and a lot of things to come together. logistics, delivery, financial support, suppliers of various kinds, a huge ecosystem of players who all have to focus towards the same shared goal. Now, finding the partners, forming the relationships, and getting that ecosystem to perform is a key part of the scaling journey, a key part of the story. And it's where particularly we might be able to intervene to help, through brokering, through endorsing, through introductions, in many different ways. This is a space where particularly the UN might be in a strong position to help innovations move to scale. One of the other bits of good news is that we're seeing some examples of what I'd call integrated vehicles, where many of these interventions, these supports, are packaged together in a way, in a structured environment and a development process to help teams. They've got different names, whether they're called accelerators or catapults or whatever, but they share this in common, that they're a structured environment and process. And I'm delighted that we've got colleagues who are going to share some of their experience from WFP, from UNICEF, and from UNDP around these structured approaches. And of course, this is paralleled in many other places. For example, the Humanitarian Innovation Fund has a Journey to Scale program, which involves many of these interventions to support teams to scale. There is, however, one wider challenge which I want to mention, which comes out in the report, because none of this is going to happen effectively if it's not placed in a context which supports innovation, the wider innovation culture. And this particularly speaks to what Kirsten was also talking about. We've got, as any large organization, a problem with what's sometimes called ambidexterity. And you can see this lovely little girl here trying to write or draw using both hands at once. What we know about ambidextrous people is they can do this simultaneously with both hands. They don't have a dominant approach, they can do it but with both hands. And that's a powerful metaphor for what we're looking for in innovation. What we want are parallel but different modes of working and thinking to support innovation and operations. And what we're really looking for is to create space for innovation to happen, which is integrated with the mainstream. Now, this wasn't the main focus of our research, but time and again, this theme of creating the culture in the UN came out in the interviews. Very briefly then, what do we point to? Well, 3 sets of recommendations. The first, there's a lot of good stuff happening. Can we deepen that current good practice? The second, can we broaden it to make it available across the UN system for all agencies? And picking up that last point, can we expand the vision and the horizons of the UN in terms of its innovation capabilities? Very briefly, some specifics in terms of deepening, building on what's already happening. 3 areas: having some kind of observatory function, which is picking up all the lessons we're learning about scaling from within the UN system and beyond, and drawing them together to make them available. In parallel, creating, I'm a professor at a university, we'd call it the library, but essentially these days, an active knowledge hub where this knowledge is codified, collated, and made available in the form where it can be used, particularly through tools. And here I mentioned, for example, the toolkit around innovation, which is being increasingly disseminated across the UN. And the third area is to bring people together into a living community of practice, sharing their ideas and experiences. And Emma is going to talk a little about that later on. In terms of the broadening, again, trying to spread across the UN some of the good things that are going on, creating a version of a structured process and environment available for different agencies to access, creating a support capability service, a kind of consulting advisory service, and continuing to press across the system the innovation message. And the last and big question, how do we expand the UN vision and capabilities for innovation? A lot of questions we don't answer in the report in detail, but we point at the need to look at how to create incentives, how to build capabilities centrally and at the agency level, and in a world of open innovation, to cooperate outside the UN around the innovation question. So, very brief helicopter flight. I'm going to hand back to you now, Johanna, but essentially, hopefully gives you a flavor for what's available and covered in more detail in the report. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John, for this introduction to a really great piece of research, a really interesting report. I've read it. I recommend everyone downloads it. We're going to share the link in the chat. It's a very enjoyable read. You're going to learn something about scaling innovation in the UN and some fun anecdotes about why scaling for some people 100 years ago was hard, and how we're building on these lessons learned. So I really highly recommend you go read it. Wonderful research conducted by Global Pulse. How many people did you interview, John? Was it like 20 entities plus colleagues from outside the UN system, or 30?
No, we did 33 sets of interviews, plus my eyes are still a bit sore from all the reading I did, but a lot of stuff outside as well. And we're continuing that process as well, because back to the community of practice, it connects lots of people with this shared concern. We all want to learn how to scale innovation. Absolutely.
So really good recommendations, absolutely based on what the UN system has learned already. And we're going to move to that very shortly. John has outlined three recommendations, three key recommendations to deepen current good practices, to broaden scale support for UN entities, and to expand the vision and the horizons of the UN. Tell us which one is most interesting or which one resonates most to you. Put it in the chat. We're very curious to hear your feedback on that. John, I've been monitoring the chat to see if I've got any questions for you. I don't actually think I see any, so I'm taking moderator privileges here. When you said the key enablers for scaling, you said a strategy, a team, resources, mentoring, not cheerleading. I like that one, space and ecosystem. Obviously, ecosystem resonates most with me, but you also said it has potentially got to be a new team. So it can't be the team that's taken it to a place where it can scale. Sometimes a new team takes over. I imagine that is a very hard thing to sell to a team that's put passion into developing idea. Can you share a few reflections on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, we do know a lot these days about the front end of innovation, and we've got a lot of role models. And of course, that's the place where there is lots of passion and energy and real personality stuff. And we often associate individuals with founding things. But founders are not always the people to carry things forward. And sometimes, if I'm really honest, they can get in the way. So perhaps this is where the mentoring as a critical friend starts to play, because it might persuade the founder with the passion that maybe they need to make some space or maybe even step down. At the same time, we know there are lots of skills which aren't particularly important at the front end, but become critical. A lot of that relationship building, a lot of that extending the ecosystem, it's partly about getting on and finding ways of working with people whose views may not fit directly with yours. So that sort of passion-driven thing may not be a good model for building ecosystems. That's not to say that the founders can't be part of it, but we have to be quite careful in thinking through what is the right organization to carry this to scale.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I'm very curious to see if it's going to come up again as a theme in our next element, so next part of the webinar. I'm going to say thank you, John, for sharing the report. It is in the chat, so please do take a look and read it. Highly recommend it. And we now want to move on to use this theory that John has shared and compare and contrast it with the experiences that colleagues in the UN system who have been working on scaling for quite some time have made. And for that, we have invited three fantastic panelists. I'm very pleased to invite Hila Cohen. She's the Deputy Head of WFP's Innovation Accelerator. We have Mike Reyes. He's the Head of Digital X in UNGP's Chief Digital Office. And we have Tanya Akone. She's a Senior Advisor on Innovation at UNICEF. Thanks to all of you for joining the session. We're really, really excited to have you here. Between the three of you, you've probably seen hundreds of ideas, if not thousands. All of them with a promise to transform the way the UN works. Some probably took off, many probably didn't. And we're very grateful that you came to share your experiences with us on why some innovations are scaled and others not, and what you have done to help. Hila, I want to start with you. WFP established its Innovation Accelerator in 2015, I believe. And can you tell us a little bit more about how you realized that scaling innovations is very different to doing a proof of concept, and how you have developed a support offering that's specific to scaling innovations?
Sure, and I will also take this opportunity to share a slide to tell our story, because I think I'm a very visual person, so I assume others are as well. So for us, we started, as you mentioned, our innovation activities in August 2015. We were a very small team then, and I was one of those team members together with the head of the accelerator, Bernard Kovac. And our core work at the beginning was to source, support, and scale innovations to address global hunger. So if you look at the slide that I'm sharing with you right now, the first three bubbles was our core, and that's what we did. We looked for innovation around the globe, internal and external to WFP. We ran innovation boot camps using human-centered design, lean startup approach, mentoring. And we also decided to give funding with ticket sizes of around $100,000. For WFP to date, you can see these are the numbers that we've had in terms of those activities. Yet what happened after a few years, we realized that scaling is not organic in the realities where we operate. WFP, is quite active in more than 120 countries and territories. Our work is mainly humanitarian, but also in the development area. And the infrastructure, the realities, the challenges on the ground for an innovation to flourish are different than innovating in Europe or North America. So we realized that we couldn't also just rely on other existing, let's say, literature and best practices that you had in the private sector. We had to be inspired by that, yet adapt, let's say, scale up best practices to our needs. So that's how in 2019, we created a scale-up enablement function. And I think it's important to share this element that it was a gradual development. We first needed to know how to walk before we could run. And so that was something that was very important to us. And there we also defined as part of the scale-up enablement program, what are the elements, what is the type of support, what is the type of needs for a scaling team. And I think one other key element was, what do we define as scale? I think different organizations, different teams would define scaling in a different way. And we decided in our case that scaling is you reach at least 100,000. If you want to go into our scale-up enablement program, a team has to have reached at least 10,000 people and or give efficiency savings of $5 million. So it's quite ambitious, but it also is linked to, let's say, the ambition level of WFP. And I also have a number of, let's say, this is also on our website, we have different teams that are part of our portfolio, and I can explain how we divided that later on. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Hila. Great insights there on how WFP has embarked on this journey. I specifically like that you're tailoring the approach to match the realities that you're seeing on the ground. You can't take, one recommendation and apply it to all the different country offices. You need to really look at that. You can't just take research from the rest of the world and assume that it's going to work in some remote part of the world. So congrats to you and the team. I know it's been a very successful stream in the accelerator. I'm a big fan. I'd like to now turn to Tanya from UNICEF, and UNICEF also has a big portfolio of innovations that you're supporting and you're hoping to take to scale. And I think they range from things like drones and blockchain-based ones to programmatic innovations to really change the way UNICEF works. Tanya, is there a fundamental difference between supporting, say, a programmatic versus a technology-enabled innovation, or are you seeing common themes come across all of them?
Definitely common themes, Johanna, and thanks for the framing of this. I'd love to just sort of share a little bit of a background, because I do think sometimes, there's a heavy digital focus in a lot of what the UN does. And we've really had the privilege, I think, starting around the similar time as a sort of WFP, we dabbled with a lot of digital work from 2011 through to 2015. And 2015, we started to put in place a lot of structures. So that started with digital. So some of our most widely scaled innovations are, not really innovations anymore. They're just work as normal. So for example, the youth engagement platforms in 93 countries and engages 29 million young people in any given month. But we continue to bring through our kind of discovery, sort of startup through scale up, an integrated pipeline of solutions. And in the digital space, these things are taking an entire ecosystem sort of approach. So one example is very much having girl-centered designed, for example, this period tracker menstrual health app. And so again, that design component about how you build that capability set, not only in ourselves, but in the young girls around the world who are helping to design this, as well as sort of our government implementing partners, to something like the very physical digital solution, such as drones, which we've used, and look at in everything from how do we train and build an infrastructure to for young people to work in this industry in the future, in the near future, all the way through to what does regulation look like? How can you have humanitarian and testing drone corridors? And how can we ourselves, through our venture fund and our crypto fund, fund startups to learn from different use cases, whether that's emergencies, data gathering, loitering to deliver, connectivity, imagery, etc. That's the world I think all of us are most familiar with. So let's pull in something completely different and look at how you scale up a strategic capability set. And so I was delighted to hear John talk earlier about, behavioral science, about capabilities like design-led and human-centered design, just as Hila was mentioning. And that is totally different because you are not only trying to build, again, with an ecosystem approach in ourselves, in our young people, and in our government counterparts and other implementing partners and donors, a capability set of how you take behavioral science, how you look at nudge and economics, how do you sort of design and co-design, which is also a cultural change because it is a power structure leveler. And we've done that as well. And I think one of the most impressive things is the Indian government has created its entire sort of public service training modules so that public servants can now and are now going through a process of acquiring these design-led innovation skills that are not only about innovating and designing effective solutions. And then a third sort of type of example, radically different in the life sciences, again, was sort of something where we became involved in shaping the purpose of research impact in biotechnology. And one of the things that I hope when you look at, a huge array of examples on here, is there's some common themes already emerging from this. And one of those themes is patients. Another one is people. Another one is around an ecosystem approach, because for us, the scaling objective is a transformational solution that reaches 1 million+ people in multiple countries and multiple regions. And that is not the kind of impact that any UN agency alone or even all of us together is going to reach. It takes the private sector partners, it takes delivery, and adoption and adaptation by others. And look forward to, and the other thing I hope that you're seeing is there are different models here. There's a social franchising model, there's a licensing model, there's a scaling up model, there's an adaptation. So we have 6 or 7 different models, and those are just the ones we have now. But again, there is no cookie cutter approach either to the solutions, to the types of solutions, or to their contexts, of course. And look forward to sharing more about other commonalities in the next round of questions.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Very selfishly flagging, Oki was actually an innovation that we had at the UN Innovation Bootcamp that was hosted by WFP. So there we go, ecosystem. We're really trying to bring it all together. And I think Oki is one of the great examples of UNICEF innovations that has really taken to scale, right? In something like 20 country offices, not necessarily country, often in 20 countries. So really, really great to see. Also a huge fan of your behavioral science work based in Florence, those lucky colleagues. So fantastic to see that. Thanks for sharing, Tanya. Mike, I'd like to invite you to this conversation. You're the head of Digital X, and the first sentence on the Digital X website, sorry, I had to throw this in. Digital X exists to make scaling digital solutions across borders faster, easier, and safer. That is quite an ambitious goal. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're doing this, how you're achieving it?
How we're trying, I guess. Well, first of all, thanks so much for hosting us, John. It's nice to see you, and Johanna, Hila, Tanya. I mean, I think in terms of digital innovation, and you all were such great inspirations for us when we started. So CDO, where I'm working, and the Chief Digital Office where I'm working, we just started 3 years ago. So we're humbly babies compared to all the great work that you've been doing, and we took a lot of learnings from that. So. Basically with Digital X, and I'll share my screen in a second to show more about it. We saw this great work that UNICEF was doing, that WFP, that others were doing. There's great solutions out there. And we didn't really want to recreate the wheel. And we also didn't have enough budget to run a proper accelerator either. how WFP and UNICEF are doing, because we had such a small team. So we thought, okay, well, why don't we be the convener and try to build off the great work that is already happening? But then are there some other challenges there? And so I think one of the key challenges that we noticed is that there's these great solutions that are out there, but unfortunately, a lot of governments are not taking up these solutions, right? So there's for a variety of different reasons there. And so we thought, can we go a little bit closer into that and try to create more government partnerships, but also build out the great work that's already been out there. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is the Digital X solution catalog. There's a catalog there that I'll show in a minute, but just real quick, we have about 100 different solutions there now. A lot of them are digital public goods, open source solutions, SaaS solutions. About 20 of them are UN created solutions, but there's also social enterprises, nonprofits, government. The solutions are active in 190 countries, and they're connected to about 390 million people. So we have different parameters, but a lot of the solutions are in at least 3 countries. Some are in 20, 30, 40, 50 countries. And they have all passed a global expression of interest to make it a little bit easier for procurement. But this is the catalog. We know there's other catalogs out there. There's the digital public goods catalog, Dial catalog. We're also working with them to try to get more of the solutions on board here. But what we're really trying to do in the Digital X team is try to make it easier to discover these solutions for country offices and also support in the matchmaking. I just want to share a couple examples. So one is Beacon, which I believe we discovered from WFP. And so for each of the solutions, you have a profile, who they're working with, which countries they're active with. You can see a video, problem, the solution, how it's working, how it bridges the digital divide, impact highlights, plans for expansion, and then the teams can connect to the solution provider, and our team helps to be the matchmaker essentially and talk to teams about, okay, this is a software as a service solution, or this is an open source solution, and help with that capacity building at the country level. Because a lot of people, for example, think open source solution is completely free. No, it takes some adaptation and all these things, right? So we try to support there. So yeah, just really, I'm sorry. And then I want to show another solution. So again, there's 100 solutions here. We're trying to get to about 300 or so by the end of the year. And I think the opportunity with catalogs, because there's a lot out there, is again, how do we make that more easy to find solutions, and how do we find help country offices at the right time? So we're actually going to be launching a new tool that will be using AI, where country offices can drop TORs or country programming documents or project documents or work plans, and then say, for example, they are looking at trying to engage youth and teach on digital skills. Well, then it'll show different solutions. So like YOMA is a UNICEF project, for example, and then it'd point to YOMA, the different kind of outputs and outcomes that they can expect. And then it can help country offices to get inspiration for what's possible, and also find potential partners to work with. So that's our goal. And so that instead of it, so it becomes closer and closer to like an Amazon type tool where you can find different solutions for your needs. So that's the solution catalog. In terms of things that we've learned and some challenges, because I think we have to be honest about those. I think probably our biggest challenge for UNDP has been really changing the behaviors of ourselves and our teammates, right? So the system is designed currently, and the incentives are designed for country offices to build their own solution. So that's the culture. Whenever there's a digital product, that we go straight to building our own solution, because and a lot of times we hear, because procurement is really, really difficult to work with a partner, right? And we've seen that it can take 8 months to a year just to work with a social enterprise on a relatively small project. And so it's not really worth the effort for a lot of people. And it's easier just to hire a consultant and do things the old way. But we see that 90+% of those solutions fail and are unsustainable. So we really need to take a hard look at those kind of shortcomings, but then also incentivize the right behaviors. So we've given out about $1.4 million for piloting these proven solutions in cooperation with governments, and for country offices to work with these solution providers. Again, we're working on the procurement side to try to make it easier, though it's a very, very challenging topic, but I think that's where sometimes where we have the greatest challenges, there's also the greatest opportunity to create an impact in the organization. So rather than run away from the challenge of procurement, we're running towards it and trying to find the right levers to pull to make a change. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Mike. And you've touched on, one of the key challenges that you're seeing, procurement. I think anyone who's tried to scale in the UN is very familiar with that one and how you're trying to overcome it. I'd like to throw the ball quickly back to Hila and Tanya. What are some of the key challenges that you have seen and how have you worked to address them? Hila, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think a number of things. I think sometimes there's a temptation to try to solve everything. So I think also when you're scaling. So I think also when you are setting up a scale-up function or whenever you're scaling, first of all, make sure that the innovation that you're trying to scale can actually work in 1 or 2 locations before you go into scaling. So first, make sure that the traction exists, because if you don't have a good minimum viable product or pilot or whatever, and then you try to scale, you're scaling something that's dysfunctional. So I think that's, we sometimes jump that step because we get and then also the other thing, if you're setting up your own, so that's at the project level. I think the other thing that hasn't been mentioned, and there's so many great insights from everyone here, in the scaling team, let's say the one that runs the project, not the enablers like us, have a solid team. Usually an individual won't be able to scale. It needs to have also buy-in from internally from the organization, if it's an internal innovation, from the management that the team is focusing on scale. And if it's an external startup that you're working with, you need to check that that team is solid as well. And there's different ways to assess that. The other thing we've defined in terms of enabling scaling and lessons learned is that also, let's say there's in WPs, there's key functions. We do emergency response, we do cash-based transfers, we do nutrition. We won't be able to scale and solve every problem or challenge in that thematic area, right? So we also work with that specific unit or specific country offices that are focusing on that specific problem to define what is most critical to scale. So I think there's just scaling. Sometimes we define it as we need to do everything for everything. Actually, the magic in scaling, in my opinion, and also based on our experience, is trying to focus and thinking what's the most critical, and also defining what is scaling. And I mentioned that before. I think that is super important, is having a joint definition of what scaling means.
Thoroughly agree with so many of your points, Hila. And I did a little sort of graphic here just to share a few thoughts around lessons learned, challenges, and advice. So, I think that for us, our learnings are really, there are a number of levels that you need to look at. And we benefited from a lot of evidence that was gathered on work. So we took all the work in the first 8 years, subjected that to a lot of external scrutiny, and really recognized that John said at the beginning, you need a strategy, and that vision and that strategy, and then tying next to Hila, what you were sort of saying is having discipline and having a portfolio approach was really critical, because I think that journey that you showed us earlier, Hila, where, we have no shortage of ideas inside, no shortage of amazing people with amazing ideas to propose working on. But the question that we answer, and we really put our programming at the heart, is not only what are the problems and opportunities, but what are of those can innovation actually be the biggest kind of step change, the biggest incremental, or not incremental, but transformational impact. So you cannot do everything. None of us have the resources to do that. So what do you really focus on? And how do you evidence that? So I think that is really critical. And then that kind of ties into a little bit of what the scaling paper that is being released today talks about, which is, what is that observatory practice? How do you continue look at, have an intake and therefore a strategic position on what is coming next, so that you're not kind of completely bogged down only in what you're scaling. And I think there's an important component in that scaling journey, which is, when do we, as the kind of innovation functions and enablers in our respective, across the UN, step out of it, because we are not meant to be there for, forever. And the true success is when things persist long, after we have moved out of it, and they grow and they expand, and so I think that is, the exit is super critical. John talked a lot about the business units and the teams, and we spent We had actually coaches and mentors spend a couple of months with a number of country offices in different regions, working on very different innovations at different stages, and really look through what were the commonalities of challenges that were coming up. And I saw Ifoda put a wonderful question in the chat asking about funding. And actually what we discovered is funding is not the issue. When we give, we then combine this list of emerging issues, and you can see all of them listed there. Funding was the last almost that people would put in a ranked order list. And the two that I've highlighted in terms of time poverty and legitimacy or license to operate were consistently the top two. I love what Mike was talking about in terms of incentives, risks, and rewards, because that would come up with observations on sort of challenges. And I want to this is sort of my very honest, uncovering of, let's talk about the things that really can be very challenging. So, we can all have a fantastic strategy. We can all be very evidence-based, but does everything line up? Can you line up your resourcing with your priorities? Because we do see behaviors, and then you sort of see the park the egos piece. There is a lot of value sometimes for being recognized for doing something new, and it is possibly less value in being recognized to being the 8th, 9th, or 10th country or project to adapt a solution that exists from somewhere else. And those are kind of cultural things that we do need to address, and cultural behaviors amongst our donors that we need to address. And just to sort of refer back to Ifoda's question, and I think another question around funding in the Q&A, we're very fortunate to be constantly pushing and in discussion and very much co-creating and co-developing with our funders. So we have fantastic, member states going from sort of Spain to Finland to Denmark to Sweden, and that is not completely limited to the sort of Northern Europe, but who sort of understand that you need multi-year funding, that you are on a journey, that if you actually want to make a difference at the scope of the problem, which is essentially the SDG level problem, small pilots continuously, is really not the answer to this. That impact is only going to happen if you can really affect the kind of things at an ecosystem level. And that last point about kind of learning to love adaptation is just sort of a kind of constant thing. And then if you put all these together, I think our 4 piece of advice that if you want to have success in scaling Mount Scale is that whole ecosystem approach. It is being exceptionally thoughtful around your business model for sustainability. And that starts as soon as you've been able to implement this. For us, we would implement between sort of 5 and 10 countries, and they need to be diverse, and we need to have an intentional evidencing and business model approach, because without that, all you will have is something that will die the minute that the grant funding dries up. And that's actually not a scalable sort of solution. It's having these intentional methods and teams and practices that have to go well beyond, whatever the innovation team is, because we will always be, and we should always be, very small components of a very large organization. So it has to be about more how we are sort of shifting the entire organization, and back again to people. And I did want to throw back something to John and Hila in particular, and say, I actually think that some of our challenges are not that we can't, pry open the grip of founders so that things can be moved to different teams. All of us, I think, here work in systems where our staff are rotating every 3, 4, or maximum 5 years. So in fact, unless you're happily getting someone in the first year of, the team happens to be there and they're going to be there for the next couple of years, we are dealing with the carousel of staff movements. And so sometimes that actually as an operational impact can be quite significant. Thanks.
So many great lessons learned in there, so many recommendations. Lots of themes we already heard from John in the report. So again, a good reminder to go and take that report and make it your bedtime reading. I want to go very quickly again to Mike, and then for a last comment to Hila again, if we have the time, for 1 minute. So we've heard lots of advice from Tanya. Mike, what would your one piece of advice be to colleagues wanting to scale in the UN in 1 minute, please?
Great. So, a lot of times when we think about the kind of path or the vision of what we're trying to do, and hopefully we have a concrete vision so we can kind of imagine it, right? But, also imagine that there's a road, and there's going to be it's going to be a bumpy road. We have to set our expectations if we're trying to create change, and, all these potholes along the way. we have a tendency to try to fix the potholes along the way, or at least complain about them, right? But there's so many out there, you know. You know, I would say my advice would be really focus on the sinkholes, right? The ones where the car cannot pass; it'll drop into it. The biggest problem. So again, procurement, discoverability, and working with country offices and their own ways that they are actually funding projects, rather than try to do something completely new. So I think that's where we're working on. And then also finding, you know, our boss Rob, I asked him for his advice, like, where should I start? There's so many different ways that we can go. And his advice was great, to find the early adopters, find the people that want that see that vision as well, work with them, make allies. So again, with other UN agencies and internally for country offices. So together we can kind of fix these sinkholes.
Thank you, Mike. Hila, I'm sure you've heard that advice from Rob as well. So I'm sure that you agree with it. What other advice would you offer to colleagues wanting to scale their innovation?
I think, first of all, look at your organizational strength. You know, I am someone who's just worked in WFP, and so I think I know our culture. I know what would work in WFP in terms of what is innovations, what are problems that are the heart of the operations of WFP, and exactly to what Mike referred to. So I think I really echo that. I think really what WFP can solve, let's say, I think when you look at innovation, when you look at scaling, look at your organizational strength, and it not might be the same as the sister organization. And I think that's okay, and we should be comfortable with that, you know. And I think that's okay, and each organization can leverage itself. And I think there will be also, let's say, as I'm seeing here, you know, probably the 3 organizations speaking here today have a bit more experience in scaling, and there will be a moment that there will be more cross-pollination. And yet it will be in the moments where it makes sense. I think things also need to happen organically. That's my mantra also in partnerships. You will be able to scale across others, because I saw this as a theme in the Q&A and in the chat. I think look for the partners, and maybe those are your early adopter partners. You need the early adopters in management to enable scaling. You need in the early adopters in the grassroots, in the teams in the field. But in partnerships, you also need the early adopters. Don't assume that you can bring 50 people together. Find 1, 2, 3 partners, do it well with them. The rest will follow once they see success. Thanks.
That is great advice. Thank you so much, Hila. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Tanya, for coming to share your experiences, your insights with us. Congrats on all the work that you and your teams are doing. And we do really appreciate that you're always willing to come and share back with others what you have learned, and kind of, you know, help us avoid some mistakes, not fall into some sinkholes, make it ridiculously easy. We really appreciate it. We know there were lots of questions in the chat that we didn't get a chance to come to as part of this conversation. It's a little bit of a nice segue. We obviously want to answer these questions. We want to engage with you further on the topic of scaling. It is incredibly important that we talk about scaling, that we learn from each other. And so we are looking forward to creating a space that is very much dedicated to continuing this conversation around scaling. And we want you to come together under the umbrella of the UN Innovation Network to continue exchanging, to learn from each other, to think about what promising ideas have you seen in other organizations that might be relevant to yours. So we're going to launch what we're going to call a UN group on innovation scaling. And that will be run, of course, with our friends at Global Pulse, who have commissioned this fantastic piece of research. I'm very happy to introduce you to Emma Honkvala, who will be convening this group together with me. Emma, I'm excited that we're embarking on this journey together. Who knows, maybe we'll go up to Everest. Do you want to share a glimpse of what we have in stock for colleagues who want to be part of this continued conversation on innovation scaling?
Absolutely. Thanks, Johanna. I'm also very excited. Let me just quickly share my screen so I can tell you a little bit more about this group. Here we are. Okay, so this is really a great opportunity for UN colleagues to share experiences, knowledge, and expertise in innovation scaling. We are also hoping that it will help us accelerate the adoption of good and best practices. We want to bring new views, applications, and expertise from outside the UN into the community, and maybe most importantly, facilitate an honest exchange of challenges among practitioners. So we really want to talk about those failures and the lessons learned. We are also aiming to create connections and conversations and encourage member participation. And we're hoping that this will lead to further collaboration. We will be convening the group on a regular basis. We'll organize webinars, coffee chats, share case studies, and publish stories. So there is definitely quite a lot coming your way. And it's already possible to join or sign up for this community. My colleagues are sharing a link in the chat, and we'll also share it with you via email after this webinar. Again, very excited. We hope that many of you will join this group. That's all from me today. Back to you, Johanna.
Thank you, Emma. And yeah, very excited to start convening this new space together with you and the colleagues at Global Pulse. Colleagues, if you are interested, the link is in the chat. Please take a look. We'll also send it to you via email, and then we'll create a Teams channel as well. Under the UN Innovation Network Teams space, we'll create a dedicated channel. And we very much hope that we can come back to some of the questions that you have raised either already in the channel or as part of the program that we have designed for you. So there'll be lots of interesting conversations, lots of opportunities to learn more from colleagues who have scaled innovations. We're very excited about that. Thanks to Global Pulse for initiating that. We really do appreciate it. And on this exciting and collaborative note, I'd like to invite Ahmed Al-Sayed, who's the lead for scaling innovation at Global Pulse, to share a few key takeaways and reflections from the past hour of discussions. Ahmed, are you feeling excited?
Definitely. Thank you, Hannah. This has been extremely useful. It was also great to learn from colleagues who have been embarking on this journey for such a long time. This has definitely also been, this research has been a very good learning journey for our team at Global Pulse. I'd like to definitely thank Professor John Bessent and also Ian Gray, our senior advisors on innovation scaling, for taking us with them on this important journey. Our key takeaways are definitely that this is a multiplayer game, something that John has mentioned and is echoed in the report. And I think many of the colleagues who have spoken today have highlighted, and we really look forward to continue to support as much as we can, learn, cross-pollinate ideas, and as much as we can as well, create the space with UNIN to exchange those ideas across the system. Thank you, Hannah, and thanks to UNIN for giving that opportunity also to us to convene today. And we really look forward to having this as a milestone on our innovation scaling journey as well for Global Pulse. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. And with that, it's my great pleasure to say thanks to everyone for joining today. At the beginning of this journey, we're at the bottom of Mount Everest, as John said earlier on. We're all trying to get to the top. Very few people get there alone, so let's do it together. We hope you're going to join us on this journey. Thanks to Ahmed, thanks to John, Kirsten, Emma, Tanya, Mike, Hila, our panel, our professor introducing the research. Thanks to everyone for coming together to bring this session. Thanks to you, the audience, for joining us. Please join the group, join us on Teams. Let's keep the conversation going. And let's take more innovations to scale all across the system. Hoping to see many of you there. And with that, thank you very much. And we hope to see you very soon. Bye-bye.